Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Hey, Chris, and hello everyone out there listening today. I have genuinely been waiting all weekend to talk about this one because OpenAI just dropped an entire new family of models, and I have a whole lot of thoughts.
You were talking about GPT 5.6, which landed publicly on July 9th of 2026, with 3 separate versions instead of just one single flagship release. And that alone already feels like a real shift in strategy.
Exactly right. And honestly, the naming is almost poetic this time around. They called the flagship Sol, the balanced everyday model Terra, and the fast, cost-efficient option Luna, so it reads like a little solar system of models.
I actually love that framing because it signals that OpenAI is no longer trying to sell one model to rule everything, and instead wants people to pick the right tool for the specific job at hand.
Right, and Sol is the one getting all the headlines because it is being positioned as state-of-the-art across coding, knowledge work, cybersecurity, and even scientific reasoning benchmarks all at once.
That is a pretty broad claim to make, so I am curious what actually backs it up. Because Frontier Labs love to say state-of-the-art, and the receipts do not always match the marketing.
Fair skepticism, but here's a concrete number for you. Sam Altman told CNBC that Sol is 54% more token efficient than the previous generation, specifically on agentic coding tasks, which is a real measurable claim.
54% is a huge jump, and token efficiency actually matters a lot more than people realize, because it directly determines how much a task costs and how fast an agent can finish real work.
Exactly, and that efficiency gain is the quiet story underneath the flashy naming. Because if you can do the same or better work with roughly half the tokens, your effective compute budget basically doubles overnight.
So walk me through how the 3 tiers actually get distributed to different users. Because I imagine OpenAI is not just handing Sol to absolutely everyone starting on day 1 of the rollout.
Right. So Plus, Pro, Business, and Enterprise subscribers get Sol at medium or higher effort settings. And Pro and Enterprise users can even select a version called Sol Pro for the highest quality output available.
And what about the new ChatGPT Work product and the Codex tools? Since I know those were bundled into the same announcement, rather than being treated as a completely separate release cycle.
ChatGPT Work and the free or lower tier Codex users default to Terra, which is deliberately positioned as competitive with the previous flagship model, but at a noticeably lower operating cost for OpenAI and for customers.
That is a smart move, honestly, because it means the everyday free tier experience quietly gets upgraded without OpenAI having to give away their most expensive and most computationally hungry model for free.
And paid tier users are not locked into just one tier either, since they can actually choose among Sol, Terra, and Luna directly and adjust the effort level for each one depending on the task.
Let's talk pricing for a second, because the API numbers actually tell a pretty interesting story about how OpenAI is trying to compete on cost as much as on raw capability this time around.
Sure, so per million tokens, Sol runs at $5 for input and $30 for output. Terra comes in at $2.50 input and $15 output, and Luna is just $1 input and $6 output, which is remarkably cheap for a frontier-grade model.
So Luna is basically the budget workhorse model, and honestly, at those prices, it becomes viable to run enormous batch jobs or high-volume applications that simply would not have made financial sense before.
That is exactly the point. And I think Luna might end up being the most quietly important release of the 3, because cheap and fast unlocks entirely new categories of always-on AI applications.
Now, ChatGPT Work is the part that intrigues me most, because the framing is not just chat responses anymore. It is described as an agent built to carry out whole jobs, rather than merely answer questions.
Right, and that language matters a lot because it signals OpenAI wants ChatGPT to move from being a smart assistant you consult toward being something closer to a coworker that actually executes multi-step tasks.
Do we know what kinds of jobs it is actually capable of carrying out right now? Or is this still mostly a preview with a lot of promised capability that is not fully shipped yet?
From what has been shown so far, it can turn natural language requests into polished interactive explanations and visualizations directly inside ChatGPT Work, which suggests a strong emphasis on knowledge work and business reporting tasks.
That sounds like it is aiming squarely at the same market that tools like data analysts, consultants, and operations teams live in every single day, which is a pretty ambitious target for a first release.
It absolutely is, and it puts OpenAI in more direct competition with a growing pile of vertical AI startups that have been building exactly these kinds of workflow automation products for the last couple of years.
Let's zoom out for a second here because this did not launch in a vacuum at all. It landed right in the middle of an extraordinarily busy week for frontier model competition across the entire global industry.
You are so right, because just one day before this, on July 8th, the company xAI pushed out a lower cost, business-focused version called Grok 4.5, aimed squarely at coding and enterprise knowledge work teams.
And then barely 24 hours after GPT 5.6 landed, Apple filed that trade secrets lawsuit against OpenAI connected to the whole Siri switch to Gemini situation, which made for a wild news cycle.
It really did, and on top of all of that, Google has reportedly delayed its Gemini 3.5 Pro release from June into July to fit in more testing, which sets up a genuine collision course.
So within about the same week, we have 3 separate frontier labs, either shipping, delaying, or getting sued, and somehow the model release itself almost got lost underneath all of that surrounding drama and noise.
That is honestly the theme of 2026 so far. The pace of releases is so relentless that even a genuinely significant model family launch can get buried under the next day's headline within about 48 hours.
Let's get back to the safety angle for a moment, because I noticed OpenAI mentioned working with government partners on safety assessments before this release even happened, which is a notable thing to highlight.
Right, that announcement came in late June, and it signals that OpenAI wanted to preempt the regulatory scrutiny that has been building all year, especially after states like Illinois push through their own AI safety measures.
Do you think that kind of proactive government coordination actually changes anything meaningful? Or is it more of a public relations move designed to get ahead of potential criticism before the model ever ships to users?
Honestly, it is probably a bit of both, because genuine safety testing with outside partners does add real friction and real value. But announcing it publicly is also clearly meant to shape the narrative around the launch.
That makes sense, and it fits a pattern we have seen all year, where labs try to control the story around their own releases before critics or regulators or journalists get to frame it first.
Right, and given how much intense scrutiny frontier labs are under right now, especially with things like the ransomware incident we covered last week, getting ahead of the safety conversation is basically a full business necessity at this point in time.
Let's talk rollout mechanics for a second, because I thought it was interesting that this was described as a gradual, global rollout, rather than an instant flip that turns on for every single user at once.
Yes, the rollout reached full availability across ChatGPT, Codex, and the OpenAI API over roughly a 24-hour window, which is a much more controlled approach than some of their earlier and messier launch days.
That gradual approach probably helps them catch infrastructure problems or unexpected model behavior before it becomes a massive viral story, which, given some of their past launch day incidents, it seems like a genuinely smart lesson learned.
Completely agree, and it also lets them monitor real-world usage patterns at a smaller scale first, which is incredibly valuable data when you are trying to figure out how people actually use a brand new tool.
So stepping back, what do you think the actual competitive implication of this release is for the rest of the industry, especially for companies building products directly on top of these underlying frontier models?
I think the token efficiency story is the real signal here, because if OpenAI can deliver better performance using fewer tokens, that puts direct pricing pressure on every other lab that has not made similar efficiency gains yet.
That is a great point, because efficiency compounds in a way that raw benchmark scores do not. Since a company running millions of API calls per day feels a 50% efficiency gain immediately in their actual bill.
Exactly. And that is probably why Luna, at just $1 input and $6 output per million tokens, is going to quietly become the workhorse for a huge number of production applications almost overnight.
Do you think regular consumer users, the people just chatting casually inside the ChatGPT app, will even notice or care about any of this beyond maybe the app feeling a little faster or a little sharper?
Probably not directly, but they will absolutely feel it indirectly, because cheaper inference means product teams can afford to add more features, more context, and more agentic behavior without worrying quite as much about runaway costs.
That is a really underrated point, because a lot of the coolest agentic features we have seen struggle to ship specifically because they were too expensive to run reliably at a large enough consumer scale for now.
Right, and ChatGPT Work is basically a bet that with Terra as the default engine, those agentic workflows finally become financially sustainable enough to offer broadly instead of just as an expensive premium demo feature.
Let's talk about the naming choice one more time, because Sol, Terra, and Luna is such a departure from the fairly dry numbered naming convention OpenAI has used for years. And I'm curious why now.
My honest theory is that as the model lineup gets more complex with multiple tiers and effort levels, Numbers alone stop being intuitive enough, and giving each tier its own distinct identity actually helps regular users understand exactly what they are choosing.
Then that tracks, because most people do not intuitively know the difference between GPT 5.5 and GPT 5.6. But Sol, sounding like the powerful one, and Luna sounding like the fast one, is instantly clear.
Right, it is basically product design applied to model naming, and honestly, other labs have been moving in this direction too, giving their models more brand-like names instead of purely technical version numbers.
So if you had to bet, what happens next in this incredibly crowded week of frontier releases, given that we still have Gemini 3.5 Pro reportedly coming sometime later this month as well?
I would bet Google tries to counter directly on the efficiency story rather than just raw capability, because efficiency and cost are clearly becoming the new battleground now that raw benchmark scores are starting to plateau across labs.
That is a fair prediction, and it also means enterprise buyers evaluating these tools should probably be asking about cost per completed task rather than just headline benchmark numbers when they are comparing frontier model options.
Absolutely, and I would encourage anyone actually building on these platforms to test Terra and Luna directly against their own real workloads, because the efficiency claims from any lab are worth verifying against your own specific use case.
This has been a fascinating one to unpack, and it really does feel like the industry crossed some kind of meaningful threshold this week between pure raw capability racing and a much more serious focus on efficiency and cost.
Completely agree, and I think we are going to be talking about the ripple effects of this particular week for quite a while, especially once Google and possibly Anthropic respond with their own competing next moves in the coming weeks.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.